The alley was a narrow tomb, damp and fetid, hidden in the dusty bowels of Sweetwater, and it was there, beneath the weak glow of a dying lantern, that Lydia Barnes's life and the fate of her legacy were irrevocably sealed. Her father, Old Man Barnes, lay on the beaten earth, the dust mingled with the dark blood that stained his vest, a cruel crimson mark that had pierced his back. The scene was a silent nightmare, and the last person to witness the rancher's agonizing breath was a stranger, Cade Walker. He was not there by chance. He was the last vision, the final shadow cast over the agony of a man who died in debt, and that solitary fact would be the poisonous seed of suspicion that Lydia would plant in her heart. Cade, a cowboy of striking presence and serene gaze, knelt beside the dying man, and what transpired was less a rescue and more an obscure pact. Old Man Barnes's voice was a hoarse whisper, a final prayer amidst the death rattle. He pleaded, not for revenge, but for the safety of his only daughter, Lydia, the beautiful and determined young woman he had trained to manage the ranch with mastery, the empowered girl who was the living strength of his homestead. He knew that debts were more ruthless than time, and that without his protection, Lydia would be swallowed whole. He handed Cade, the widower of 3 counties and father of a 3-year-old girl, not an inheritance but a duty, to marry his only daughter, protect her land, and her name. Cade, with the quiet dignity of one who honors an oath made upon death, assented. In that handshake stained with blood, Lydia's destiny was cast without her consent. Lydia received the news of the murder and the pact almost simultaneously. The grief of the loss was an open wound, but the shock of the imposition was the deepest injury. She barely knew Cade Walker, only the reputation of a man quick on the draw and silent in his actions. The fact that he was the last person to see her father alive, that he had been found in the alley and that he had so readily agreed to the union, lit the first spark of a terrible suspicion in her quick mind. Could he be the killer? Had he orchestrated the death to seize the ranch and the bride? The doubt was a bitter poison that rose in her throat, transforming her mourning into a cold determination. However, the debts were real, the bank's threats, imminent. Lydia had no choice. She would marry the man who might have killed her father to save what remained of the family legacy. The wedding was a spectacle of pain and embarrassment. The Sweetwater church was filled with curious and judgmental faces, all whispering about the strange union and the speed with which the heiress married the richest man in the region, a widower with a gaze too serene to be honest. Lydia, dressed in black beneath her veil of mourning, walked to the altar with the strength she used to calm the wildest horses, but inside, her heart was a battleground. Cade awaited her, imposing and calm. His eyes, which were rumored to hide the skill of an excellent sharpshooter, were unreadable. Beside him, almost invisible, was his daughter, Ilara, a 3-year-old with blonde curls and curious eyes, watching her new mother. The air was heavy with Lydia's distrust, who could smell the fear and suspicion in every fold of the fabric. When she uttered her, "I do," her voice came out soft, but charged with a cold resolve. She was not accepting a husband, but a target. Cade's mysterious silence, his restraint, only fueled Lydia's belief that he was concealing the truth that the earth had witnessed in the alley. The Walker Ranch was vast, wealthy, yet immersed in a monastic solitude, a stark contrast to the chaotic warmth of the Barnes farm. For Lydia, it was a gilded cage, a place where Cade's kindness seemed only a well-rehearsed mask. The smell of the house was clean, of leather and firewood, but Lydia perceived a phantom scent of lead and gunpowder in every shadow, the vivid memory of the alley. Cade settled her into a luxurious room but treated her with a respectful distance that, instead of reassuring her, intensified her suspicion. He never forced her, never even touched her beyond the brief handshake at the ceremony, honoring his part of the pact with a sobriety she found theatrical. The introduction of Ilara, Cade's 3-year-old daughter, was the first element to destabilize Lydia's cold determination. The little girl was a creature of light, quick to laugh, and soon attached herself to Lydia, seeking her natural sweetness. Lydia, with the strength of one who knows how to give affection, found herself unable to reject the child's innocence. Watching Cade with Alara was to see a glimpse of his romantic side, the man who knew how to care, the way he held her, adjusting his hat with the care of one handling a fragile possession, and the patience with which he taught her to feed the horses. This genuine tenderness, however, made her suspicion even more confusing. How could a man capable of such kindness be the cruel killer who had shot her father in the back? Lydia began her silent investigation, using her determination and quick reasoning to search for cracks in Cade's serene armor. Her initial focus was on the ranch office, a place Cade kept locked with the discretion of one guarding valuable secrets. She used her trips to town to speak with her father's old acquaintances, seeking details about his meeting with Cade on the night of the murder. The stories were vague. Her father had dangerous debts with local loan sharks, and Cade had arrived in town only days before, coming from the south to expand his lands. The pieces fit two opposing narratives. Cade could be the protector Old Man Barnes begged for, or the creditor who eliminated him to take the prize. The action escalated one late afternoon when Cade was absent. Lydia used her ranching expertise as a pretext, distracting the ranch hands, and managed to enter the office. The smell of leather and old paper was oppressive. She searched for debt documents, land maps, or any sign of a direct financial motive. Her fingers moved with the speed and precision of one who understands the value of a secret. She found boxes of documents, but no definitive proof. At the bottom of a drawer, however, she found a small, dark wooden case. Inside, there was an unusual type of projectile, a cartridge of a larger than usual caliber. Her rancher's intuition alerted her. Could this be the murder weapon? Lydia's heart pounded with the adrenaline of the discovery. Suddenly, she heard the trot of Cade's horse, a familiar and close sound. She barely had time to put the case away and return to the office door before Cade Walker's shadow filled the hallway. He looked at her with his usual calmness, but the way he adjusted his hat seemed like a silent warning. "Looking for something, Lydia?" His voice was soft, but the question was a trigger. Lydia, quick-witted, maintained her composure, her illuminated smile masking her panic. She invented an excuse about looking for a cookbook from her mother, something that sounded naive and feminine, contrasting with her known competence in cattle management. Cade observed her for a moment, the serenity in his eyes harder to read than ever, but he did not contest her, merely pointing to a bookshelf. The moment had passed, but the case of projectiles was etched in her memory. From that day on, the cohabitation became a silent fencing match, each observing the other's movement. Cade continued with his acts of kindness, mending the fence, or bringing a soft shawl for Alara and for her, gestures that subtly confused and disarmed her. Lydia's emotions fluctuated between the repulsion of being married to a potential killer and the growing attraction to his silent strength and unexpected chivalry. He was a potentially great lover, her instincts suggested, but her father's shadow hovered over the marriage bed. Lydia's investigation focused on discovering the origin of that unusual projectile. She used her cattle negotiation skills as an excuse to travel to a neighboring town and discreetly showed a sketch of the projectile to a gunsmith her father trusted. The gunsmith, a grumpy old man, identified the cartridge as belonging to a rare German hunting rifle, almost exclusive, which he remembered selling to an acquaintance of his, a wealthy and ruthless loan shark who had a reputation for collecting debts with blood interest, a man who always traveled with his two-armed henchmen. The revelation cast a new and complex shadow over Lydia's premise. Had Cade killed the loan shark and not her father, or was the loan shark involved in her father's death? The crime map was complicated. Back at the ranch, Lydia noticed Cade's increasingly frequent and mysterious absences. He would leave before dawn and return late, covered in dust and with a weariness that did not come only from working with cattle. Lydia's actions became more daring. She began to follow Cade from a distance, using her tracking skills developed on the farm. In one of these pursuits, she saw him in a secret meeting on the property line with a man in a dark suit. The conversation was tense, and the way Cade adjusted his hat A gesture she recognized as the prelude to action was a silent warning. She couldn't hear the dialogue, but the exchange of a bulky envelope between the two confirmed that Cade was involved in a high-stakes deal, something he kept strictly secret. Lydia's emotion intensified, mixing fear, anger, and an almost obsessive curiosity. She confronted Cade, not about the murder but about her father's debts, demanding to know what was truly at stake. Cade, with his quick intelligence, deflected, focusing on the safety of her and Alara. He confessed that her father's debt was larger and more dangerous than she imagined, and that the ranch was only the tip of the iceberg. He gave her the deeds to the Barnes farm, paid off and settled, and placed them in her hands, a material gesture of empowerment. "It's yours now, Lydia. You are free. Go. I won't tie you to a secret that is not yours." The offer of freedom, instead of calming her, made her distrust him even more. If he had nothing to hide, why did he want her to leave so badly? The mystery of the alley continued to be the lead thread that bound them, and she chose to stay, determined to uncover the truth. The forced proximity on the Walker Ranch, fueled by uncertainty and the constant fencing match, began to erode the wall of suspicion Lydia had built around her heart. The silent cowboy's masculine charm, expressed in his kindness toward Alara, and his stubborn respect for Lydia's dignity, had become an intimate enemy, making it difficult to maintain her initial revulsion. However, it was a night of sudden storm, when the sky broke over the ranch with a savage fury that shattered the last barrier between them. The Old West was ruthless in its climatic extremes, and the sound of thunder, dry and cracking, combined with the oppressive smell of wet earth and the violence of the rain lashing the window panes, awakened an old trauma in Lydia, a deep-seated fear she had tried to bury beneath years of hard work. She curled up in her room, her body trembling not from cold but from a visceral dread, as the wind groaned in the chimneys like a spirit in agony. The ceiling and walls of the room, which had once seemed her fortress, now felt like they were closing in on her. Cade heard the muffled crying. He did not force the door but knocked gently, respectfully. Upon entering, he saw the beautiful and determined woman reduced to a childlike fragility, hugging her own knees. Without a word, he wrapped her in a thick blanket and picked her up in his arms, not with the brute force of an owner, but with the firm affection of a protector. He carried her to the main living room, where the fireplace fire crackled with a comforting warmth, the only sound that dared to defy the storm outside. His scent, a clean mix of leather, mild tobacco, and an unmistakable essence of a man of the land, was unexpectedly sweet, enveloping her. In the arms of that man, whose physical strength needed no demonstration, Lydia felt a deep and forbidden security. Cade's kindness, his silent patience, and the contained masculine charm in his gestures, the way he nestled her against his chest, warming her with his own body while the fireplace roared, completely disarmed her. She did not resist the embrace that was more protection than passion. In that room, illuminated by the fire and isolated by the storm's fury, suspicion gave way to an urgent vulnerability. What followed that moment of confession and protection on the bare rug, under the watchful and tender gaze of the fireplace, was the complete collapse of the last walls. Passion, restrained by suspicion and grief, erupted with a ferocity that only extreme vulnerability can provoke. That encounter was not a rushed act of possession, but a sensual and careful consecration, entirely dictated by Cade's affection and gentle strength. Characteristics that Lydia barely dared to admit made him irresistible. The rain outside, previously a terror, transformed into a muffled whisper, a sonic curtain that isolated the couple in their private world of fire and fur. Cade's clean masculine scent, a blend of leather, mild tobacco, and the field breeze, enveloped Lydia, acting as a balm against the phantom smell of gunpowder that tormented her. Cade kissed her at length, the kiss laden with relief and gratitude for her surrender. He did not employ the haste of a debt collector, but the patience of an experienced lover who knew that Lydia's pleasure was the true testament to his honor. He laid her down onto the coarse softness of the rug. His movements were calm, his breath warm and controlled. Cade used his mouth and his strong hands to explore Lydia's body, an act of affection that dismantled the barriers of grief and fear. His hands moved from her face to her neck, gliding to her shoulder and then tracing the curve of her waist with a delicacy that contrasted sharply with the strength of his grip on a weapon. He undressed her slowly, each piece of clothing removed with the reverence of one uncovering a precious secret. His eyes, which Lydia feared would be cold, were warm with admiration, making her feel desired and beautiful rather than used. The act of fusion of bodies was conducted with the controlled strength that defined Cade Walker, potent, but always focused on her safety and pleasure. He devoted time to preparing Lydia, ensuring fear did not give way to pain. He was an excellent lover, whose focus was entirely on her experience. When he finally entered her, it was with a firm, yet controlled depth and rhythm. He held her hip with one of his strong hands, anchoring her to the bare rug to ensure stability and possession without violence, while the other hand was placed protectively on her abdomen or over her heart, maintaining the emotional connection at the peak of physicality. Lydia felt the strength of his body over hers, the potency of a man who knew what he wanted, but he maintained the pace dictated by her response. There was no rush for his own pleasure. There was only the focus on taking her with him. The union beneath the flickering light of the fireplace was a storm of affection and passion, a turning point where duty was drowned by desire. Lydia's cries of pleasure were the only answer Cade sought, echoing in the room, muffled by the rain outside. Cade's clean-smelling, strong body completely enveloped her, the weight of his form a promise that he would protect her, not kill her. That intimate act, born of fear but sealed by affection and irresistible attraction, cemented their bond, making the task of proving his guilt all the more painful. The first night was a surrender to safety, where the fear of the storm was exchanged for the forbidden and tender warmth of Cade's body. Dawn arrived with the promise of a storm. The air on the Walker Ranch was heavy and still, a stillness that was a premonition. Cade rose early, adjusting his hat with the serious touch of one preparing for a duel. He kissed Alara goodbye, and his serene eyes turned to Lydia, a gaze of affection and plea. He saw her with the rifle in her hands. Lydia did not flinch. She confronted him with the weapon and the projectile, directly accusing him of her father's death. She demanded to know the truth about the alley, about the gold map, and about his mysterious kindness. Cade did not defend himself with words, but with the quietness that precedes action. He confirmed that he had the weapon and the projectile, but revealed the truth behind the secret. The loan shark, the man with the German hunting rifle, was the true killer. Lydia's father had been murdered because he refused to hand over the mining map. Cade had arrived too late, finding Old Man Barnes dying. The loan shark was an old enemy of Cade's, a man who had forced him to flee the south, killing his wife, Mary, to steal his land. The projectile was Cade's, yes, but he had used it to kill one of the loan shark's henchmen in the alley, in an act of self-defense, cleansing some of the evil before kneeling beside Lydia's father. He had kept the truth a secret to protect her from the loan shark, who was still alive and was coming in search of the map. The secret meeting with the man in the suit was the final negotiation for the map, Cade's attempt to buy Lydia's peace and the ranch. As the truth unfolded, the trot of horses broke the stillness. The loan shark, a gloomy and fat man, flanked by his henchmen, arrived at the ranch, his expression of greed hardened by hatred. He came seeking the map and to eliminate the last obstacle, Cade Walker. The action became frantic. The loan shark aimed his weapon at Cade, but Lydia, quick-witted, aimed Cade's rifle at the loan shark. The cowboy was an excellent marksman, but Lydia demonstrated the strength and speed on the trigger inherited from life on the range. The shootout was quick and brutal. Cade, with the speed that only a man trained in death possessed, drew his gun and took down the second henchman. The loan shark, however, aimed at Alara, who had run out to hug her new mother. Lydia screamed, and Cade, in a swift and desperate move, threw himself in front of the bullet intended for the child. The shot struck his shoulder, but before the loan shark could reload, Lydia, with the cold determination she had mistaken for fear, fired the German rifle. The shot was precise, a master shot, and the loan shark fell, silenced forever. The desert dust swallowed the sound of the last shot. Lydia ran to Cade, crying, tearing her dress to staunch the wound. He smiled, the sincere smile of one who was finally free from a dark secret. He hadn't killed her father. He had risked dying for her and for his daughter. That moment of sacrifice and the revealed truth were the most powerful gesture of love and honor. The police arrived and the scene was cleared. Their union, sealed by a death pact, was rewritten by the blood of a protector. The epilogue was written in the peace of the ranch. Cade recovered quickly, and the marriage of duty blossomed into love. Lydia, with her sweetness and strength, became Alara's mother and Cade's partner, her dignity and autonomy restored. The Barnes Ranch was annexed to Cade's, under Lydia's impeccable management. The mystery of the alley dissolved, leaving behind the certainty that the cowboy was not the killer, but the guardian, the man she chose to love and care for, quick on the draw to protect the family he had built. The sun set over Sweetwater, and in the great house the scent of leather, firewood, and love was the new and undeniable truth.